Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and The Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Linda, who is an intermediate photographer from Alaska. Linda shot this in Willow, Alaska with Mount Denali in the background. She said since the first snowfall she had been waiting to shoot this image because she felt like it'd make a great black and white landscape shot. She really wanted the viewer to get the sense of just how big Denali is in the background, even though it's hundreds of miles away. And she used a Canon 50D 70 to 200 zoom and an effective focal length of 160 millimeters at ISO 100, stopped down to f8, and exposed the file for 1/60th of a second. And under questions and comments, Linda says she uses Photoshop CS3, but she's not much more than a beginner with the software. She'd love to have some editing tips that would help her make the mountain pop out more from the sky. So let's get right into it here. One of the first things that I love about this image is just the way Linda has used a combination of leading line and the long telephoto lens to connect the town here to Denali looming in the background. Love her idea, and I love the way that she's pulled that off. I'm also really enjoying the framing in the lower part of the image. Very dynamic. This is sort of on a third in the image, and it brings us out in a very dynamic way. And then I love the way these two sides of the image play off of each other. There's a strong sense of balance that's asymmetric, which is particularly powerful in a rectangular framed image. I love the small bit of guardrail here, longer part here. There's a lot more information over here and a lot more things. There's not as much information over here, but the information that's here is higher contrast and more graphic. So sort of really classic way of playing two things off of each other that are different in different ways, and the ways that they're different end up creating a real nice balance between the two. I also love the moment with a passenger car going into the wilderness, EMS vehicle coming out. That can create all kinds of narrative and story in the viewer's mind, and I love the dynamic relationship in the moment between these two vehicles, just continuing to push the feeling of everything, having a great sense of movement. I also love the beautiful tones Linda has in the lower part of the image. I love high contrast black and white, and this bottom part just has beautiful local contrast, almost seems like an etching. You know, and another thing I'll mention here real quick is just the moment on the road. It's not the overall shape of the road, it's also the rhythm of this ribbon effect with light, dark, and light and dark because of the ice and the snow. Let's get into the part of this image that Linda wants to change, which is to make the mountains pop more. Right now there's very low contrast back here. And the truth is, I sort of like this variation. At one time, the telephoto and the composition is suggesting the mountains are looming, but with them kind of ghosted, it sort of creates the feeling of maybe a lot of atmosphere and a lot of distance. But if we wanted to push this in another direction, here's how we might do it. Please hear me say there's so many different ways to do things in Photoshop, and this is just sort of my take on it. I don't like using selections very much to make changes like the changes I'm about to make, because I feel like that starts to push people in the direction of creating unnatural transitions. You sort of create problems you then have to try and feather out or fix. I like to use adjustment layers and layer mask, and I'll show you how I would do this. I'm going to do Apple J or Control J on a PC, just as a good workflow to copy my background. I'm going to go to curves, and I am going to make the sampling tool active here, and I'm going to figure out where these tones are on the curve, because one of the first things I want to do is get more form and more local contrast in the flank of the mountain. And all these values are up here on the curve. I want to find sort of the darkest area up in here, and it's somewhere right in there. So I'm going to go ahead and sample this part on the curve, and I'm going to pull down very hard, and then I don't want to just make those areas darker. I want to preserve contrast, and I'm going to do that by grabbing the very top of the curve and steepening the curve to create a feeling of sort of the difference between the exposed rock and kind of the luminescent snow. And I'm going to go ahead and make the mask active. I want to apply this change locally, so I'm going to do Apple Delete, Control Delete on a PC, fill the mask with black. White's my foreground color. I'm going to get zero hardness on the brush, so the brush is totally feathered, and I'm going to start at a very low opacity, let's just say 17%. And I'm going to first bias some areas. Now where I'm painting with white, I'm going to start to apply that curves change. I'm going to bias some areas that already have a feeling of form. I don't want to miss an opportunity to make this even more dynamic in the way that I apply it. So instead of just grabbing a medium-sized brush and painting on these areas, I'm first biasing some areas, and we're not going to do all this work, but if this was going to be printed, I might come in and really get detail with this. I'm going to bias these areas, and then I'm going to grab a bigger brush, and I'm just using the bracket keys, left and right bracket to make it bigger. And now I'm going to come in and paint. And watch what I'm doing here. I'm avoiding the top part of the mountain, and I'm going to show you why I'm doing that in just a second. So this might look a little bit unnatural, but for right now I'm just worried about the lower part of the image, and I'm just creating in a subtle way, building up that contrast and creating the feeling of more form, which is going to make the mountains come forward a little bit in the composition. I'm also going to go ahead and make a more dramatic base for the mountains. That'll help them pop too. I'm going to click here and then hold down the shift key and click over here and make a line straight across on that adjustment layer mask and apply that change. And I'm going to keep working in there and then say okay. Now I'm going to go create another curves adjustment, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make more pop between the sky and the mountains. I'm going to sample the sky, and I'm going to this time because I'm really just concerned with sort of just pulling straight down on this area on the curve and making it darker. I'm going to click within the image, which I can do in CS4, and pull down, and watch what happens. Because I didn't touch the top of the mountain with my brush before, in this change I'm now going to create some nice pop between the sky and the mountain. If I had darkened the whole mountain down, then I wouldn't have as much contrast now. So another part of this work is thinking ahead when you're sort of building mask and stuff. And I'm going to click on the mask. I'm going to do Apple or Control Delete and apply this locally. I'm going to get an even lower opacity because I'm painting in an area now that's very homogeneous, and it's easy to create effects that are unnatural in their transition. I'm going to get a bigger brush now, and please hear me say the corners are not going to be perfect because we're not in full screen mode, and I really would need to pull the brush out all the way to make the corners perfect. I am going to go ahead and bias the corners right off of the bat and the top of the image just a little bit with a little bit of a vignetting mask, just sort of a classic move in classical printing to contain the eye. So I'm just doing that biasing, and now I'm going to start to come in and apply this change. And you can see that I'm building this up very slowly, and I'm just going to forget about those corners because I can't pull the brush out far enough. We'll just leave those. But you're going to see what's going to happen now in the way that I apply this change. Watch how I'm going to mostly paint with the brush above the top of the mountains. There's zero hardness on the brush. It's going to feather out and blend across the top part of the mountain with the earlier curves adjustment layer that we applied. And notice that I'm just doing this work and building it up very, very slowly. So I'm not creating any problems for myself. I'm building towards what I want in a subtle way, and I don't have to go back and start to try and soften things or back out of it. And I could just keep going here, just continuing to feather. And this is what we've done so far. And then at this point I'm starting to get a lot more tone back there in the background. Now what I might do is something I'll do quite a bit in a situation like this. I'm going to go to a levels adjustment. I'm going to set a true white point in this image, and then I'm going to come in and add a bunch of low end black to give a feeling of a lot more pop back there. Again, fill the mask with black, Apple Delete or Control Delete, again with very low opacity on the brush, zero hardness on the brush. First I'm going to come down in here and bias some of these areas towards a little bit more local pop and contrast, and then I'm going to go back up to the top part of the image. And if I was going to print this, I might come in here and get a smaller brush and really work on some of these areas to just create more of a dynamic feeling of form and movement. I'm going to go ahead and get a bigger brush now, and again just coming all the way across the top to create even more contrast. And you know, how far you wanted to go with this would just be a matter of personal taste, but hopefully this helps Linda and helps some other people in terms of applying changes like this and making them appear seamless. I mean, you know, here's what our masks look like. They're very, very subtle in terms of their transitions, even in this local work that we did in here, because we're always feathering. This is where we started, and this is where we ended up. And like I said, just a matter of taste as to how far we wanted to push this. We could keep applying curves and or levels adjustments or other things to the image. I want to say a huge thank you to Linda. Beautiful landscape shot. Big thank you to her for sharing this image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique.